So we'll be starting first of all with the macro section. But before beginning this lecture, just see that the syllabus has basically 5 subparts in paper 1. So paper 1 is basically including your micro. Then second sub unit will be advanced macro. Third is money, banking and finance. Fourth one is international economics. And fifth one is growth and development. 5 sub-unit within the paper 1. And in macroeconomics, this is basically we are starting with the classical and Keynesian part. So classical and Keynesian part. Now those who have missed the first 10, we started basically 10th October batch with this micro, and within micro it was market structure. So lecture number 1 to 10 was basically for that market structure topic. So we are continuing basically with this macroeconomics, and in macroeconomics first of all I will be providing you the introduction, that means what will be the basic approach, and then we will starting with the exact question. So those who have missed the initial 10 lectures, वो online class आप पहले देख लेंगे, and for the remaining you have to continue in the offline. So first of all, divide this entire macro into broadly 2 parts. So just initial part is basically just I am introducing the macroeconomics. So just divide this entire macroeconomics broadly into 2 parts based upon 2 different we can say set of principle, or based upon 2 different school of thought. One school of thought जो traditional economics है, collectively they are called as the classical economics. So one important part will be the classical economics. The counter to classical was provided by Keynes. That means the drawback in the classical approach was pointed out by Keynes, and their follower are referred as Keynesian. So classical economists follow one set of principles. So we must know what are those set of principles which are followed by the classical economist. What was the drawback of that concept, and how that drawback was overcome by the Keynesian argument. But the Keynesian argument will also have its own drawback. Those will be overcome by the neo-Keynesian, those who have modified the Keynesian. And some recent economists are still following the classical concept, but they have modified classical concept. So they will be known as neo-classical. मतलब आज की डेट में जो इकोनॉमिस्ट हैं वो either they are following classical view or Keynesian view, but not as it was provided. They have modified the concept. Concept को modify कर रखा है. तो जो modified classical है, that is post classical or neo classical, and the modified Keynesian argument is post Keynesian or neo Keynesian, you can say. So what are those principles on which classical economics was based? So initially just focus on the important point of differences between classical and the Keynesian argument. In macroeconomics, when you are writing, basically when we write let us say if I am writing y का मतलब macro में हमेशा output के लिए होगा, you can read it as GDP. So in symbol we can simply write it by y. So in the classical concept it is said that GDP is a function of, that means it depends on, it is a function of stock of capital, labor, technology, raw material and so on. So simply I write production as a function of capital, labor, technology and so on. But at the same time in macroeconomics we also write that output of economy, that is y, is determined by aggregate demand, y equal to AD. And aggregate demand means, aggregate demand is basically consumption demand by household, investment demand by firm, government spending, plus if economy is open then it is net export, export minus import. So you are writing y is equal to AD also. But when you write y equal to AD, it means as demand will increase, output will increase. That means what determine output? Output is determined by the demand. और यहाँ क्या कह रहे हैं? Output determined by the capital, labor, technology and so on. Now suppose for example if I say that the GDP of India in 2022 is more as compared to what it was in 1951. It has increased many times, but why? What could be the reason why GDP has increased over a period of time? You will say that over a period of time the stock of capital is more, over a period of time labor is more, over a period of time we have better technology so that we can produce more of output. But if I say that the output of 2022 or output of 2021 was less as compared to output of 2020, output of 2021 was less as compared to output of 2020, then you will say that okay, it was due to COVID. But what happened due to COVID? Whether the stock of capital decreased? The answer is no. Whether the labor force decreased? The answer is no. Whether technology has depreciated? The answer is no. So why output has decreased? You will say that demand is less. Because of lack of demand, there was less production, therefore less GDP. Both statements are correct. But when you are comparing 2022 GDP with 1951 GDP, you are taking a long run view of economy. And when you are comparing 2021 with 2020, you are basically taking a short run view. So in the short run, Keynesian argument is correct. In the long run, classical is correct. So classical economics is long run economics and Keynesian is short run economics. So one important point was this. Second important point, you must know that it is basically long run description of economy and Keynesian is short run description of economy. Classical is long run description, Keynesian is short run. That means you will find all classical concept or argument correct in the long run, and we will find all Keynesian argument correct in the short run. Classical correct in the long run and Keynesian correct in the. But what is the main difference between short and long run? When you say it is a long run, that means wages are flexible, prices are flexible. But when I say it is short run, that means there are some rigidity. Wages are rigid or prices are rigid. So classical concept is basically a long run description, Keynesian argument is a short run description of economy. Now, when the classical economists provided the description of economy, their argument is that in the labor market we will always have full employment. In the labor market we always have full employment, but full employment means, full employment does not mean that everyone is employed. Full employment only means that labor market is in equilibrium. That means demand for labor is equal to supply of labor. So classical concept is based upon full employment. Classical concept is based upon full employment. And full employment actually means that demand for labor. So just I am writing demand and employment के लिए लेबर का डिमांड और लेबर का सप्लाई बराबर है. फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट का मतलब ये. And why full employment is always there and how it is guaranteed? It is guaranteed because classical believe that wages are flexible. Suppose if labor demand and supply are not equal, then what will happen? So their argument is that if labor demand is more than labor supply, in that case wage will increase immediately. And if labor supply is more and labor demand is less, in that case wage will fall. So wage will adjust immediately, and their flexibility ensure that labor demand is always equal to labor supply. Wages flexible है. Flexibility of wage is an important assumption of classical. Classical concept में कहा जा रहा है wages are flexible. So flexibility of wage is an important feature here. Flexibility of wage. Flexibility of wage. Classical concept is based upon full employment, and full employment is guaranteed because of flexibility of wage. Labor market is always in equilibrium, therefore we always have a full employment, and full employment is guaranteed because of flexibility of wage. But Keynes considered that labor market is not in equilibrium. Generally we observe unemployment. So what is the condition of unemployment? Unemployment means लेबर का सप्लाई लेबर के डिमांड से ज्यादा है तभी अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट होगा. सप्लाई ऑफ लेबर इज मोर एंड डिमांड फॉर लेबर इज लेस. तो वाई सप्लाई इज मोर एंड डिमांड फॉर लेबर इज लेस? Economy is characterized by unemployment. We see that unemployment. But why there is unemployment? There is unemployment because lack of demand. Due to lack of demand for goods, there is lack of demand for labor. So when there is lack of demand for labor is less and supply of labor is more. But in that case, wage will not fall. Classical say that if labor supply is more, then wage will fall. Keynes argued that even if labor supply is more, wage will not fall because wages are rigid. And what makes wages rigid? Wages are rigid because there is presence of labor union in the market. Union will not allow wages to fall. Government has set a minimum wage law. Wages cannot fall below that also. So even if labor supply is more than labor demand, wages cannot. So classical Keynesian argument is basically based on the assumption that wages are rigid, and due to rigidity of wage we find unemployment. Just follow the basic principles. I said in the classical concept output is determined by the capital, labor, technology and so on. Keynes argued that output is determined by demand. Classical is a long run description, Keynesian is short run description. Classical believed in always full employment due to wage flexibility. Keynes observed that there is unemployment because wages are rigid. Rigidity of wage. Rigidity of wage. Wages are rigid in the Keynesian argument and wages are flexible in the classical argument. Clear? Then the other major differences when we explain the classical believe that supply creates its own demand, popularly known as Say's law. Supply creates its own demand. So the entire classical concept based on supply creates its own demand. Supply creates its own demand. Say's law. Supply creates its own demand. That means if you supply a product, demand for that product is automatically generated. If you supply a product, demand for that product is automatically generated. How to explain that? If you supply a product, its demand is automatically generated. But why and how? Suppose a product is being produced. Supply का मतलब है production. There is a production of a particular product. So if you produce any particular product, the argument of Say's law is simple. Suppose if you produce any particular product X, how to produce a product? Production will involve use of labor, it will use capital, it will be using land, entrepreneur and so on. To labor you will pay wage, to capital you will pay interest, to the landowner you pay rent. So those wage, rent, interest are basically income to the factor of production. So production generates income. Production is generating what? Income. And what is the use of that income? Classical believe that entire money will be spent. Money is used only for the transaction purpose. Money has only one role to play, that is to act as medium of exchange. So if you generate that money will be spent, but it will be spent on what? It will be spent on the product that has been produced. So in a way, supply creates its own. If you create a product, if you produce a product, production will generate income and that income will be spent on the same product. तो एक सिंप्लीफाइड एग्जांपल के अंदर if economy is producing only this product, you are spending only on that product. So production generates income and income will be spent on the commodity. In that way supply creates its own demand. Now question is, if supply creates its own demand, that law is correct, then how we can explain a recession or depression? During recession what happens? Is it lack of supply or lack of demand? Lack of demand hai. Production is there but there is no buyer or less buyer. But if production is there and there is less buyer, it means this law is not correct. Supply creates its own demand was the basic principle of classical view. But classical failed to explain that Great Depression in 1929. So when they failed to explain what is happening in the economy due to Great Depression, that explanation was provided by Keynes, that supply does not create its own demand, because money is not held only for transaction purpose. Money could be held for other purpose as well. Money may be held for speculative purpose as well. तो वो पार्ट आपको Keynesian argument के अंदर explain करना है. So supply creates its own demand was basically a classical view, but in the Keynesian view supply does not create its own demand, and that reason was basically when we explain the classical, in classical demand for money has only one component. Why we keep money? We keep money because money helps to buy goods and services, that is money acts as medium of exchange, that means money is used in order to make transaction. So demand for money is only for transaction purpose. Demand for money is only for transaction purpose in the classical. Keynesian concept say that demand for money is for transaction as well as for speculative purpose. We will explain that concept when that concept will come. That means we keep money for speculative purpose also. That means we hoard money. We are keeping that money, we are not spending it. जो आप मनी को स्पेंड नहीं करोगे तो गुड्स का डिमांड नहीं होगा, और जब गुड्स का डिमांड नहीं होगा तो लैक ऑफ डिमांड हो गया, और लैक ऑफ डिमांड की वजह से लैक ऑफ प्रोडक्शन होगा. सो रिसेशन हैज बीन एक्सप्लेन बाय यूजिंग द कंसेप्ट ऑफ स्पेकुलेटिव डिमांड फॉर मनी. वो यूनिक कंसेप्ट है एडेड बाय केन्स. केन्स ने इस पार्ट को ऐड किया. केन्स इज नॉट सेइंग दैट क्लासिकल इज इनकरेक्ट. केन्स इज सिंपली सेइंग दैट क्लासिकल एक्सप्लेनेशन इज नॉट कंप्लीट. उसने ट्रांजेक्शन को रिफ्यूट थोड़ी किया, ट्रांजेक्शन तो है ही. मनी इज हेल्ड फॉर ट्रांजेक्शन पर्पस, but money is also held for speculative purpose. So that point was added by the Keynesian. So transaction demand for money is the reason for keeping money in the classical view. You can explain it also as money act as only medium of exchange. Money act as only medium of exchange in the classical concept. Money act only as medium of action in the classical view, but in the Keynesian view money act as medium of exchange plus money also act as store of value. Money के अलग अलग function है, but classical only believed in the medium of action, and Keynes said that it is acting as medium of action, but also money acting as store of value. Money also acts as store of value. There are different reasons for keeping money. So for example, suppose why you keep money in the fixed deposit. Money kept in fixed deposit, is it for transaction purpose? No. But money kept in the current account is used for transaction purpose. So money perform basically different role. Therefore, there are different types of deposit in the bank also to cater those different functions. So, medium of action is the role of money in the classical view, and medium of action plus store of value is the role of money in the Keynesian. Then classical and Keynesian difference. In the classical approach, aggregate supply curve. In the classical approach, aggregate supply curve is vertical, और जब कभी आप एग्रीगेट सप्लाई का ड्रॉ करेंगे, जैसे रिमेंबर you will write price and output on the axis, but this is your classical AS. We will derive this in this first lecture, how and why classical aggregate supply curve is vertical. And in the pure Keynesian approach, aggregate supply curve will be horizontal. So why aggregate supply curve is horizontal here? We have to explain that part. Now if this is the aggregate supply curve which is vertical, now no matter where you draw the demand curve, suppose I draw the demand curve here, aggregate demand, so position of demand will determine the price. If demand shifts, then if demand shifts, in that case only price will change without affecting, मतलब demand output को affect नहीं करता. Demand is not affecting output. Output is affected by, demand is not affecting the output, but that means output is determined only by what? Supply. Output is determined only by supply. ये supply side economics है. Classical is supply side economics. Classical supply side economics होता है. और राइट साइड अगर आप यहाँ पे एग्रीगेट डिमांड ड्रॉ करते हो, तो एग्रीगेट डिमांड का जो पोजीशन होगा वो डिटरमाइन करेगा आउटपुट को. और एग्रीगेट डिमांड का अगर शिफ्ट हो जाए तो आउटपुट विल इंक्रीज. बट वाई आउटपुट इज इंक्रीजिंग देयर एंड नॉट हियर? आउटपुट इज नॉट चेंजिंग हियर बिकॉज क्लासिकल कंसेप्ट में आउटपुट इज ऑलवेज इक्वल टू द फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट लेवल. ये ऑलरेडी फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट आउटपुट है, एंड इन दैट केस आउटपुट इज नॉट इक्वल टू full employment, so it will continue to increase till full employment. After reaching full employment, then it will become vertical line. तो क्लासिकल व्यू में याद रखेंगे एग्रीगेट सप्लाई का वर्टिकल है और कंडीशन में हॉरिजॉन्टल लाइन है. So what is the role of AD? Specify the role of AD in the classical and the role of AD in the Keynesian. What is the role of AD in classical? The role of AD in classical is to determine price, and the role of AD in Keynesian is to determine output. Output determined by demand in the Keynesian approach. In the Keynesian approach, output get determined by the demand. That is why you have written this first equation. Y equal to what? AD. Output determine होगा demand side से. Output will be equal to demand. And in the Keynesian output, classical output is determined by the कैपिटल, लेबर, टेक्नोलॉजी एंड सो ऑन. ठीक है, तो ये मेजर जो डिफरेंसेस है वो डिफरेंसेस बेसिकली आपको याद रखना है. सो जस्ट आई रिपीट, इन द क्लासिकल अप्रोच आउटपुट इज फिक्स और डिटरमाइंड बाय कैपिटल, लेबर, टेक्नोलॉजी. इन केनीशियन आउटपुट इज डिटरमाइंड बाय द डिमांड. सो व्हेन डिमांड विल चेंज, आउटपुट विल चेंज. बट इन द क्लासिकल आउटपुट तभी चेंज होगा जब कैपिटल चेंज हो या लेबर फोर्स चेंज हो या टेक्नोलॉजी चेंज हो. क्लासिकल इज अ लॉन्ग रन इकोनॉमिक्स, Keynesian is short run economics. Classical is based upon full employment assumption due to wage flexibility. Keynes is based upon unemployment due to wage rigidity. Wages are rigid in the Keynesian but not in the classical. Classical assume that supply creates its own demand, but that explanation was based on the assumption that money only acts as medium of exchange. Keynes was not agreeing with that because money also acted as store of value apart from medium of exchange. And the aggregate supply curve in the classical is vertical, in the Keynesian part it is horizontal. But ये दो polar extreme है अभी, remember. We are basically discussing this polar extreme. One says it is vertical, other says it is horizontal, but in reality it is neither vertical nor horizontal. In reality, aggregate supply curve will be basically positively sloped. Aggregate supply curve का slope positive होगा, but पॉजिटिव पे भी एक पर्टिकुलर पॉइंट होगा जहाँ पे y किसके बराबर है, फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट के बराबर. बट जो recent economists say they agree that output can change from the full employment. It can be more than full employment or it can be less than full employment, but in the long run it will be equal to the full employment. तो क्लासिकल और केनेशियन व्यू के अंदर डिफरेंसेस है, फिर आपको लेटर ऑन क्या करना, सिंथेसाइज करना है इनको, मतलब रिकंसाइल करनी है. ये अप्रोच याद रखिएगा, क्वेश्चन पेपर के अंदर भी रिफ्लेक्टेड होगा. लाइक जस्ट आई विल शो द क्वेश्चन. ठीक है, टॉपिक वाइज क्वेश्चन आपके पास हर टॉपिक अवेलेबल है. भाई लास्ट ईयर के मेंस में वन क्वेश्चन वाज लिक्विड ट्रैप का, ये लिक्विडिटी प्रेफरेंस एक इनिशियल आर्गुमेंट का क्वेश्चन है. ये भी डिमांड फॉर मनी का क्वेश्चन हो गया, मतलब 2 क्वेश्चन तो डिमांड फॉर मनी से रिलेटेड आ गए. आईएस कर्व मैक्रो का क्वेश्चन. द शेप ऑफ एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व इन द क्लासिकल एंड केनेशियन मॉडल. बस what will be the shape of aggregate supply curve in the classical and in the Keynesian? One part of that question we will answer in this lecture. That is, what is the shape of aggregate supply curve in the classicals. We will be starting with the classical, so you can answer this question after the end of the class. The one part, that is shape of aggregate supply curve in the classical approach. ठीक है, तो usually you will find that around 4-5 question macros वाले section से रहते हैं. 4 to 5 question are every year from the macro section. In 2022 it was 4. 21 you can find a question, 1 question, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In fact 8, because I am including demand for money also in the macro section. Demand for money जो third unit का part है वो macro के साथ relate हो गया. Quantity theory of money is also written in that third part, but I am including in the macro part. Clear? So before beginning that part, just remember we are starting with the classical equilibrium model. Now starting with the classical equilibrium model. Just write down the subtopic within this broader topic. First we will derive classical AS. First topic will be this. We will be deriving the classical aggregate supply curve first of all. And whenever you draw aggregate supply curve, it means you are writing relation between price and output. But why aggregate supply curve is vertical, we have to explain that. Okay, this will be your first topic. Then second topic will be derive classical aggregate demand. First we will derive a classical AS, after that we derive classical aggregate demand. That classical aggregate demand curve will be based upon classical quantity theory of money. We will be deriving that classical AD from classical quantity theory of money. We will explain that. That will be the third subtopic. Just we are listing down the topic that we have to cover within the classical. And remember that when we derive the classical aggregate demand curve, it will be negatively sloped. So one tool is basically classical aggregate supply curve. Second tool will be classical. You are studying the model. So to study the model there are different tools. One tool is classical AS. Second tool is classical AD. Third tool in the classical is classical theory of rate of interest. So you can mark the fourth topic as classical theory of interest. Classical theory of interest. That classical theory of interest is based on, that classical theory of interest is basically based on loanable fund theory of interest. Loanable fund theory of interest. Loanable fund theory of interest. So that will be another important topic within classical. Classical theory of rate of interest, how rate of interest is determined in the market, and it has been explained by the loanable fund theory. That means there is a supply of loanable fund, there is a demand for loanable fund, and their equality will determine the rate of interest. So we have to explain this part in detail. After that, fifth topic will be policy implication. Policy implication. Policy implication. That means what will be the implication of monetary policy change or fiscal policy change on the economy. That means if central bank will change money supply, then how it will affect economy, or if government changes the tax or government expenditure, then how it will affect the economy. So how fiscal policy and monetary policy will affect the economy, that will be covered in the policy implication part. ठीक है, वो policy implication के अंदर में आएगा. So generally this classical concept, जो तीन important tool है, classical AS, classical AD, classical theory of interest rate. These are the three important tools. By using these three tools, we explain the classical model. But the model is basically a broader term. So when we study the classical model, in order to explain that model, there are three different tools. One will be classical AS, other will be classical AD, third will be classical theory of rate of interest, and then when we combine all, then we can explain the policy implication part. And for referring all these topic, you have to refer chapter number 3 and chapter number 4 from Freud. Chapter number 3 and chapter number 4. These two chapters are enough for that classical concept. You can answer all questions related to the classical concept just by reading these two chapters. ठीक है, these two chapters are included in your macro study material. Initial जो first chapter है वो chapter 3 है. Classical AS, then classical. So the first chapter, that is chapter number 3, is explaining only classical aggregate supply curve derivation. The fourth chapter is explaining the remaining part. ठीक है, तो ये आपका source हो गया, ये clear है. But ultimately I am referring that source and dictating to in the class. So you don't need to refer to that notes. But if you want to read, you can refer chapter number 3 and chapter number 4. And remember, some question may be applied in nature also. So applied in nature, for example, I will just explain the few questions like कि क्लासिकल और कंडीशन के डिफरेंसेस कई सारे होते हैं. लाइक यू कैन रीड दिस वन क्वेश्चन, जस्ट रीड दिस क्वेश्चन नंबर 37 फर्स्ट. Question basically says that explain how economic employment and real wage would change in the typical classical model. So the word is classical model. So when we explain the model, we will use aggregate supply curve, we will use aggregate demand curve, also will use loanable fund theory. तीनों यूज करने आपको. Explain the how employment and real wage would change in a typical classical model in the event of an increase in supply of labor. In the event of increase in supply of labor. So supply curve of labor अगर change होता है तो उस पर क्या impact होगा. After comma it says money wage becomes rigid. So what is the contradiction here in the question? Question is saying classical model, but classical model is based on the assumption that money wages are flexible. But question ने क्या कर दिया? Model classical है, assumption Keynesian ले लिया. If you change the assumption, then the outcome will also be different. In the classical model, we find that there is no unemployment. It is always full employment. But it was full employment only when wages were flexible. But if wage becomes rigid, then there will be unemployment in the classical model also. तो आपने assumption change कर दिया है. Assumption change करेंगे तो उसके accordingly answer करना होगा. So in paper, just be careful when you are reading the macro section question. Question could be applied in the nature as well. So you can answer those questions, no problem with that. First we will explain with the or start with the first part. ये first topic, अब one by one ये topic लिखते जाइए. We have to first of all explain classical aggregate supply curve. Classical aggregate supply curve. Just focus here first. When we derive aggregate supply curves, obviously we will write price on one axis and output on the other axis. And the classical concept is based upon the idea of what is called as classical dichotomy. Is based on the idea of classical dichotomy, and classical dichotomy actually means separation between nominal variable and real variable. Classical dichotomy is based upon basically refers to theoretical separation between nominal variable and real variable. Now what is nominal and what is real? बहुत सारे टर्म यूज करोगे आप मैक्रो में. आई विल से नॉमिनल वेज, रियल वेज, नॉमिनल इंटरेस्ट रेट, रियल इंटरेस्ट रेट, नॉमिनल एक्सचेंज रेट, रियल एक्सचेंज रेट. ठीक है, तो नॉमिनल और रियल के कई सारे टर्म होंगे, बट बेसिक डिफरेंस बिटवीन नॉमिनल एंड रियल इज व्हेन वी एक्सप्लेन एनीथिंग नॉमिनल दे आर एक्सप्रेस इन मॉनेटरी टर्म, एंड व्हेन यू एक्सप्लेन एनीथिंग रियल they are expressed in physical term. Just for example, if I say that a person nominal wage is 100 rupees, वो उसका nominal wage है. What is the real wage? Real wage means how much goods he can buy with that 100 rupees. So how much goods you can buy with that 100 rupees? That depend upon the price. So that depend upon the price. So if I say that price of the product is also 100, then you can buy 1 unit with that 100 rupees. If price is 50, then you can buy 2 unit. तो हमने अगर nominal wage को price से divide कर दिया तो quantity हो गई वो, whether you can buy 1 unit or 2 unit or 3 unit. So if classical argument is that if you change one nominal, other nominal will change, but it will not affect any real change नहीं होगा. If there will be change in one nominal, I repeat, there will be change in the other nominal, but it will not affect any real. Like for example, real हो गया ये पेन, ये real है, इसका प्राइस नॉमिनल है, इसका प्राइस नॉमिनल होगा. So suppose if I say how much money you keep in order to buy this pen. So if the price of this pen is 10 rupees, so how much money you will keep? 10 rupees to buy this pen. If the price doubles, then you need to keep 20 rupees. So is that change in demand for money nominal or real? Earlier you kept 10 rupees, now you are keeping 20 rupees. So either that change is real or nominal? Nominal. Because the product तो same है. Earlier you are keeping 10, now you are keeping 20 rupees. So Similarly, you can take another example. This class is real or nominal? ये real है. Fees for this class is nominal. That means when you express in the monetary term, it is nominal. When you express in the physical term, whether it is goods or service, then it is a real term. So when I write output here and when I write price here, out of these two, which one is nominal? Price nominal हो गया और output, और डाइकोटमी कहता है कि रियल और नॉमिनल में कोई डिफरेंस, कोई रिलेशन नहीं है. दैट मीन्स जो एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व है वो वर्टिकल है. इसका मतलब होता है वेदर यू कीप प्राइस P1 even then output will remain same. If price is P2 even then output will remain. So because increase in price means change in nominal, but nominal will not affect real. So entire this topic is going to explain the classical dichotomy. Classical dichotomy is at the core of the classical concept. And dichotomy means, again I repeat because it is an important topic. ये अलग से भी क्वेश्चन आ रखा है classical dichotomy and monetary neutrality पे explain करना है. Dichotomy means separation between nominal and real. It simply means there is a nominal variable and there are a real variable, but nominal and real are separate. Like nominal means nominal money, nominal like nominal wage, money nominal है, price nominal है, wage nominal है, rate of interest nominal हो सकता है. और जो real concept है वो क्या आएगा? इकोनॉमी का आउटपुट रियल है. मैंने अगर M को P से डिवाइड कर दिया तो रियल हो गया, W को P से डिवाइड कर दिया तो रियल वेज हो गया. वैसे रियल इंटरेस्ट रेट होता है, रियल एक्सचेंज रेट होता है. क्लासिकल क्यों कह रहा है कि अगर एक नॉमिनल चेंज होगा तो बाकी नॉमिनल चेंज होंगे बट रियल पे फर्क नहीं पड़ता. सो वी हैव टू बेसिकली एक्सप्लेन दैट आर्गुमेंट. क्लियर? तो यहाँ तक आप कह सकते हो कि दिस वाज जस्ट एन इंट्रोडक्शन अबाउट द अप्रोच. सो द सिलेबस ओनली मेंशन क्लासिकल वर्ड. Just refer that syllabus part again. It simply says in the macro section classical. That's it. ठीक है, तो यहाँ जो क्लासिकल लिखा हुआ है उस क्लासिकल को एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए मैंने बेसिकली ये कंटेंट बना रखा है. उस क्लासिकल वर्ड को एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए 5 डिफरेंट टॉपिक्स करने. ठीक है, एंड इट विल टेक अराउंड 3 लेक्चर टू कवर ऑल दिस 5. ठीक है, तो सिलेबस का जो क्लासिकल वर्ड लिखा है उसको मैंने इलेबोरेट करके यहाँ समझा आपको. So now we can start with the classical concept. So just write down few basic points in the classical model. First paragraph, write down. Classical economics, write down. Classical economics emerged. Classical economics emerged as a revolution against. Classical economics emerged as a revolution against a body of economic doctrine or economic principle, against a body of economic principle known as mercantilism. known as mercantilism. मतलब क्लासिकल से पहले की जो इकोनॉमिक्स है, क्लासिकल से भी पहले की इकोनॉमिक्स, दे वर बेसिकली नोन एज mercantilism. The features of mercantilism were number 1, Bullionism. Bullionism means it was a belief that a country is powerful if that country has more stock of precious metals. उसके पास गोल्ड ज़्यादा है, सिल्वर ज़्यादा है, प्रीशियस मेटल्स ज़्यादा है, So the country having more precious metal was supposed to be more powerful. That was a belief of mercantilism. But nowadays, which country is supposed to be more powerful? Why you say US is more powerful? Because more powerful because of its GDP. More powerful because the economy is able to produce more output. So the power is not now evaluated based upon how much stock of metal you have. It is evaluated by how much output you can produce. So this first point pe. Booleanism, that is a belief that wealth and power of a nation were determined by its stock of precious metals. Second, the belief in the need for state action, that is government action. The belief in the need for state action to direct the development of capitalist system. So if the approach was basically mercantilism, then and the belief is Booleanism, that means the belief that economy is supposed to be more powerful if you have more stock of precious metals. How a country will generate that more stock of precious metals? When a country will have more stock of metals then? If the focus is that you have to keep more stock of metals, you will put a restriction on import, because that will result in the outflow of those metals, and you will be promoting more and more export. So protectionist policy basically हो जाती है, restricting the import. Next paragraph. Remember these things you will not require while answering the question. क्वेश्चन लिखते समय इन सब की जरूरत नहीं पड़नी है, because क्वेश्चन का नीचे तो दूसरा होगा. These things you are writing just in order to have a understanding that there was an economist before classical also. So before classical it was mercantilism, then you are moving from mercantilism to the classical, and then from classical to the Keynesian, from Keynesian to the new classical and new Keynesian. Next paragraph. In contrast to mercantilist, classical economist emphasize the importance of real factors. Importance of real factors, underline that word, real factors, in determining the wealth of nation, and they stress the optimizing tendency of market, and they stress the optimizing tendency of market, and they stress the optimizing tendency of market in the absence of state control. Optimizing tendency of market in the absence of state control. इस लाइन का मतलब है जो क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिस्ट है, दे बिलीव्ड दैट मार्केट इज efficient. Market is efficient, that means it will have a inbuilt system where each consumer will maximize their own utility, firm will maximize their own profit. That means the invisible hand of the market. Invisible hand of the market means demand and supply forces. The invisible hand of the market will lead to the welfare of the country also. That statement was given by the Adam Smith. Adam Smith was a classical economist. So the invisible hand is basically the market forces. That means you are relying on the market to solve all the problems. Market efficient है. So if market is efficient, there is no need for government to regulate that market. So that approach was called as the laissez-faire policy, least interference from the government side, because market itself is efficient. Market efficient है तो उससे interfere करने की जरूरत नहीं है. When you need to regulate, you need to regulate the market when market is not perfectly competitive. Market is not competitive. Next paragraph. Next paragraph. Classical analysis was primarily a real analysis. Primarily real analysis. Underline that. Real analysis word. The growth of an economy was the result of increased stock of factors of production, and advances in technology. The growth of economy was the result of increased stock of factors of production and advances in technology. ग्रोथ का मतलब ग्रोथ ऑफ आउटपुट होता है, और आउटपुट को क्लासिकल मॉडल के अंदर आपने इस वाई से डिनोट कर रखा है. बट ये वाई किसका फंक्शन है? कैपिटल का, लेबर का, ये फैक्टर ऑफ प्रोडक्शन हो गया, टेक्नोलॉजी का फंक्शन है. तो जो आउटपुट होगा इट विल चेंज ओनली व्हेन स्टॉक ऑफ capital will change, labor will change, technology will change. So economic growth is a result of increase in the factors of production. It is a result of increase in the technology. Continue. Next paragraph. According to classical, money played a role only in helping transactions. Money played a role only in helping transactions. It means money only act as medium of exchange. Next paragraph. Both the aspect of classical economics that is stress on real factor, stress on real factor, stress of real factor, and effectiveness of free market mechanism, after comma, developed in the course of developed in the course of controversy over long run question concerning what determines economic development, The entire macro is basically designed in order to, that means an important question is there for any country. What determines economic development? The aim of every country is to develop, but what determines development? So there are different answers to that. Based upon different principle that you follow. According to classical ये जीडीपी है. तो डेवलपमेंट का मतलब यहाँ पे अगर आप उसको इनिशियली ग्रोथ के साथ रिलेट करते हैं, दैट मीन्स यू आर एबल टू प्रोड्यूस मोर आउटपुट. बट क्लासिकल आंसर दैट टू डेवलप, दैट मीन्स टू प्रोड्यूस मोर जीडीपी, इकोनॉमी मस्ट हैव मोर capital, labor, technology. The same question was answered by Keynes, and the answer given by Keynes is that economy will produce more output when there is more demand in the economy. By stimulating the demand, it can produce more output. But here, demand has no role to play in determining the output. Next paragraph. Classical economists felt that free market mechanism would work to provide market for any goods that were produced. To provide market for any goods that were produced. The market will basically, line का मतलब in fact हो गया supply creates its own demand. Just in bracket you can mention Say's law. Within bracket just write down Say's law. Therefore, two features of classical analysis arise as part of attack on mercantilism. Two features of classical analysis arise as part of attack on mercantilism. One, they stress the role of real factor. As opposed to monetary factors. In determining output and employment. मतलब जो इकोनॉमी का एम्प्लॉयमेंट और आउटपुट है वो गवर्न किससे होगा? रियल से गवर्न होगा, मॉनेटरी से गवर्न. मनी विल नॉट हैव अ रोल टू प्ले इन डिटरमाइनिंग आउटपुट एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट. सेकेंड, क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिस्ट Classical economists stress the self-adjusting tendency of economy. Classical economists stress the self-adjusting tendency of economy. Self-adjusting tendency of economy. Self-adjusting tendency of economy. मतलब इकॉनमी सेल्फ एडजस्ट कर जाता है, उसको एडजस्ट कराने की जरूरत नहीं है, मतलब गवर्नमेंट के इंटरफेरेंस की जरूरत नहीं है, इकॉनमी का एक इनबिल्ट मैकेनिज्म है. सो बेसिकली यू आर गोइंग टू एक्सप्लेन दैट. नाउ यहाँ तक आप कह सकते हो जैसे इन्फॉर्मेटिव हो गया, वो इन्फॉर्मेशन आपके पास रहना चाहिए. जो की वर्ड है वहाँ पेपर में आंसर के लिए बस 1 और 2 लाइन अभी तक के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट हो गया. दैट क्लासिकल इकोनॉमिस्ट स्ट्रेस द रियल फैक्टर्स एज अपोज टू monetary factor in determining output and employment. Now when we explain that part, you can first of all start with the production function. ये सब हेडिंग शॉर्ट देते रहना. पूरे चैप्टर में पूरी क्लास के अंदर एक्सप्लेन एक ही क्वेश्चन हो रहा है, एंड दैट इज डेरिवेशन ऑफ एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व. We are deriving the aggregate supply curve, but to derive that aggregate supply curve we are using short tools. So when we write the production function in macro or in the classical, output is expressed as a function of stock of capital and employment of labor. Stock of capital को constant कर लेना, n रेफर कर रहा है employment को, k refers to capital and y refers to output. Just tell me one thing, when you write here capital, is it real capital or financial capital or both? A real capital like plant machinery, financial capital like bonds, shares, or is it both? Here real है, classical analysis is real analysis. So capital is here real capital, means stock of plant, machinery, equipment. We are referring to that. So capital is real capital, employment is real employment of labor, and output is real output. So in fact there are 3 variables there, y, k and n. But on axis you are basically taking one variable output here, second variable employment here. Keeping capital constant, keeping capital constant. So keeping capital constant, as you engage only employment, initially production will increase. But remember, we are not studying micro now, we are studying macroeconomics. So there could be increasing return for some firm, there may be diminishing return for some firm. So initially return may remain constant also, but after that it will be diminishing. आप सिंपली डिमिनिशिंग के फॉर्म में ड्रॉ कर लीजिए. ये y हो गया एज अ फंक्शन ऑफ कैपिटल एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट ऑफ लेबर. प्रोडक्शन का फंक्शन ही बनाएगा. So what is this production function or what is this curve repaint? A relationship between what? Output and employment. So how much is output? If I say how much is output, so you will simply say the output depends upon what? Employment. If employment will be N1, then corresponding to that employment, output will be Y1. If employment is N2, then corresponding to that employment, output will be Y2. So output basically depend upon employment. Output depend upon employment. ठीक है? And employment depend upon how many labor will be employed. That will depend upon how much is the demand for labor and how much is the supply of labor. So this N basically depend upon labor demand and labor supply, and their equality will determine N, and then N will determine Y. Labor demand and labor supply will determine employment, and employment will determine the output. So we have to explain everything. Who demand labor? Who demands labor? Labor demanded by firms. Why they demand labor? And how much labor they will demand? What is their objective in a market? To maximize their own profit. So they will demand that much of labor where their own profit get. So we have to determine that part. Who supplies labor? Workers, household. How much labor they will supply? What is their objective? To maximize their own utility. And they get utility from? They get utility from the wage that they will earn, but they also get utility from not working also, less their free time. वो अपनी यूटिलिटी को मैक्सिमाइज करेंगे, फर्म अपने प्रॉफिट को मैक्सिमाइज करेगा और उनकी इक्वालिटी से एम्प्लॉयमेंट डिसाइड होगा और एम्प्लॉयमेंट विल डिटरमाइन दी आउटपुट. ये फर्स्ट पार्ट है. भी एंड प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन summarizes the relationship between production function summarizes the relationship between total input and total output. Production function summarizes the relationship between total input and total output. After comma, assuming a given technology. Assuming a given technology. अब यहाँ पे ध्यान दो, जब आप ये रिलेशनशिप ड्रॉ करें तो हमने कैपिटल को क्या माना है, टेक्नोलॉजी को भी क्या माना हुआ है. सो इफ टेक्नोलॉजी विल चेंज देन दिस फंक्शन विल shift up. Same labor can produce more of output with better technology. Same labor can produce more of output with better capital. So when capital stock will change, technology will change, then function will shift up. ठीक है, इस पॉइंट को आप नोट में वहाँ नीचे लिख दीजिए separately. Just make a note. The production function will shift up. The production function will shift up. The production function will shift up when there is improvement in technology. When there is improvement in technology, or increase in the stock of capital. Increase in the stock of capital. Or increase in efficiency of worker. Increase in efficiency of worker. Below that, from this production function, next paragraph, from this production function we can derive marginal product of labor. We can derive marginal product of labor. We can derive marginal product of labor. इसको यहाँ पे आप MPN लिख दो ना, marginal product of labor. But what is the meaning of marginal product? Marginal product is basically change in total product due to change in labor. मतलब जो लाइन आपने बना रखी है उसका स्लोप है वो. So if we can draw the marginal product of labor, you can draw that marginal product of labor curve as declining. मतलब जब तक अगर ये आप लाइन स्ट्रेट बनाओगे तो उसका स्लोप कांस्टेंट रहेगा, फिर डिक्रीजिंग. वैसे पूरा डिक्रीजिंग ड्रॉ कर सकते हो. डिमिनिशिंग मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट ऑफ लेबर. Okay, next paragraph. The classical assume that employment of labor is determined by forces of demand and supply. Employment of labor is determined by forces of demand and supply in the labor market. Forces of demand and supply in the labor market. So the main features of classical labor market, analysis is the assumption that market works well. मतलब मार्केट एफिशिएंट होता है. तो सब firms and individual workers optimize their objective. Firms and individual workers optimize their objective, and they have perfect information, about relevant prices. In addition, there are no barriers to adjustment. Of money wage. And market always clear. There are no adjustment to money wage. There are no barriers to adjustment of money wage and market always clear. इस सेंटेंस का मतलब ये है कि अगर लेबर का डिमांड और लेबर का सप्लाई है, ये हमेशा इक्वल होंगे, और अगर इक्वल नहीं है तो क्या होगा? वेज चेंज कर जाएगा. वेज फ्लेक्सिबल है और वेज पे कोई रेस्ट्रिक्शन, देयर इज नो मिनिमम वेज लॉ, नो प्रेजेंस ऑफ लेबर यूनियन, and market always clear. That means labor demand is always equal to labor supply. Now we have to basically explain this. ये explain करना आपको. Now explain करने के लिए अब जरा ध्यान से देखना स्टेप क्या होना है. हमने पहले लिखा है प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन, मतलब प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन डिटरमाइन द आउटपुट, बट आउटपुट डिपेंड अपॉन एम्प्लॉयमेंट, एम्प्लॉयमेंट डिपेंड अपॉन labor demand and labor. So first we will explain labor demand, then labor supply, then their equality will determine n. Once we determine n, then we can determine y. ठीक है. So now we have to explain labor demand first. Demand for labor. ठीक है, पहले यहाँ समझ लेंगे जरा. फर्स्ट थिंग इज दैट लेबर इज डिमांडेड बाय फर्म्स, एंड हाउ मच लेबर दे विल डिमांड? देयर ऑब्जेक्टिव इज टू मैक्सिमाइज देयर ओन प्रॉफिट. सो फर्म विल डिमांड दैट मच लेबर वेयर देयर ओन प्रॉफिट गेट maximize. And what is profit maximization condition? Profit maximizing condition say that marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost. Clear? फर्म का प्रॉफिट तब मैक्सिमाइज होता है जब वो उतनी क्वांटिटी बनाए जहाँ पे एम आर और एम सी इक्वेट हो गया. नाउ सिंस वी आर स्टडिंग द क्लासिकल मॉडल, in that classical model assumption is that market is competitive, market works well, efficient है, but efficient is only competitive market. In a competitive market there are large number of buyer and seller. When there are large number of buyer and seller, one firm do not have any control over price. Price is determined in the market. Price is determined in the market and one firm simply accept the price. मतलब firm के लिए price क्या रहेगा? फर्म के लिए प्रोडक्ट का प्राइस कांस्टेंट है, मान लिया 10, प्राइस उसके लिए कांस्टेंट रहना है. प्राइस कांस्टेंट होगा, उस सेम प्राइस पे फर्म कैन सेल 1 यूनिट, 2 यूनिट, 3 यूनिट एंड एज मच यूनिट एज इट कैन. सो व्हाट विल बी द टोटल रेवेन्यू इन दैट केस? टोटल रेवेन्यू पे इनटू क्यू हो गया. सो 10 into 1, 10 into 2, 10 into 3 and so on. What is marginal revenue? From there you will calculate MR. But marginal revenue is addition to revenue. But every time when you sell additional unit, you get the same amount, that is 10 rupees. So every time addition is how much? तो फिर ये प्राइस का कॉलम और एमआर का कॉलम सेम है, तो क्या मैं प्राइस एमआर की जगह प्राइस लिख सकता हूँ? यस. ठीक है, वो मीनिंग आपको क्लियर होना चाहिए, समझाना नहीं है वहाँ पे आपको. इन प्लेस ऑफ एमआर व्हाट यू हैव रिटन, बट व्हाई? Because classical economists assume that market is perfectly competitive. Since market is competitive, therefore each firm acts as price taker. Therefore, in place of MR, I can write price. So, in place of marginal revenue, you have written price. Now, come to the marginal cost. What will be the marginal cost of production? Marginal cost means addition to total cost due to one additional unit produced. Addition to total cost due to one additional unit produced. अब जरा ध्यान से देखना, भी कॉपी मत कीजिएगा. प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन लिखा, y is a function of capital and labor. We are calculating marginal cost of that output. But to produce one extra unit of y, capital तो constant रखा हमने. So how you can produce one more unit? By using extra labor. But when you use extra labor, you have to pay wage. So addition to cost will be only the labor cost. Capital तो constant है. Addition to cost only will be the labor cost. Now question is, suppose if I say that wage rate is 100 rupees per hour. That means if you employ one labor for extra hour, in that for that extra hour you have to pay 100 rupees. Now question is, what is marginal cost then? Is it 100? To employ one additional labor, you are paying 100 rupees for additional labor hour. तो क्या वो marginal cost 100 हो जाएगा? 100 हो सकता है if in that 1 hour labor produces only 1 unit. फिर तो 100 हो जाएगा. But suppose for in 1 hour labor produces 2 unit. But you are giving 100 rupees per hour. So addition to cost will be 100 rupees for 2 unit. So for 1 unit, 50. If that labor produces 4 unit in that hour, then 25 हो जाएगा. मतलब जो वेज है उसको हमने किससे डिवाइड किया? 1 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस करता है या 2 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस करता है या 4 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस करता है, दैट विल बी कॉल्ड द मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट. तो आप वेज मार्जिनल कॉस्ट की जगह क्या लिखना है मुझे? वेज डिवाइडेड बाई marginal product of labor. I repeat my point. Example से याद रहेगा. Suppose I said the wage is 100 rupees for every hour and marginal product of labor is 2. That means for 2 unit cost will be 100. For 1 unit, so wage divided by MPN. So in that case it will be 100 upon 2. अगर ये मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट चेंज हो गया तो मार्जिनल कॉस्ट आपको सिर्फ याद रखना W अपॉन MPN करना है. मार्जिनल कॉस्ट के लिए क्या लिखोगे आप? W बाई MPN. तो यहाँ पे हमने वेज अपॉन MPN लिखा हुआ है. सो कैन यू राइट वेज इन दैट केस एज इक्वल टू प्राइस इनटू एमपीएन, मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट को प्राइस से मल्टीप्लाई कर देंगे तो मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट की वैल्यू आ जाती है, एंड दैट कुड बी ऑल्सो रिटन एज वैल्यू ऑफ मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट. सो वेज इक्वल टू व्हाट, वैल्यू ऑफ मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट होगा. वेज इक्वल टू वैल्यू ऑफ मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट होगा. वेज इज इक्वल टू द वैल्यू ऑफ मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट. Wage is equal to the value of marginal product, and same thing you can write in this form also. Just focus again. ये cost जहाँ पे आप लिख रहे हैं, इस इक्वेशन को लिख रहे हैं यहाँ पे दोबारा. Can we write W upon P equal to what? MPN. W upon P equal to MPN. W अपॉन P इज इक्वल टू MPN. आप दोनों में से किसी भी तरीके से लिख सकते हो. या तो कहेंगे फर्म विल ऑलवेज एम्प्लॉय दैट मच लेबर वेयर वेज इज इक्वल टू VMP, और फर्म विल ऑलवेज एम्प्लॉय दैट मच लेबर वेयर रियल वेज इज इक्वल टू MPN. W by P इज बेसिकली रियल वेज. ये रियल है और ऊपर नॉमिनल है. ये नॉमिनल है और ये रियल है. क्लासिकल इज रियल एनालिसिस, तो आप रियल के टर्म में लिखो, बेटर है. ठीक है, विल एक्सप्लेन, वो सारा स्टेप में आ जाएगा अभी लिखते समय. पॉइंट क्लियर है. फर्म इज ऑलवेज डिमांडिंग दैट मच लेबर वेयर देयर ओन प्रॉफिट गेट मैक्सिमाइज, एंड देयर ओन प्रॉफिट मैक्सिमाइजेशन रिक्वायर दैट दे विल प्रोड्यूस दैट मच आउटपुट वेयर MR इज इक्वल टू MC. In place of MR you are writing price because market is competitive, and marginal cost is W upon MPN. So write down first. Labor is demanded by firm. Labor is demanded by firm. Labor is demanded by firm, and competitive firm will, and competitive firm will always produce that much output. Competitive firm will always produce that much output. Competitive firm will always produce that much output where their own profit get maximized. Where their own profit get maximized. Where their own profit get maximized. As we know, for profit maximization, MR must be equal to MC. MR must be equal to MC. Marginal revenue must be equal to marginal cost. Since classical economists assume perfectly competitive market. Classical economists assumed perfectly competitive market. And under perfect competition, each firm act as price taker. Each firm act as price taker. So MR is equal to price. MR is equal to price. MR is equal to price. On the other hand, marginal cost will be marginal labor cost only will be only marginal labor cost only, as capital is fixed. Marginal cost will be marginal labor cost only, as capital is fixed. And marginal labor cost will be nominal wage divided by marginal product of labor. Nominal wage divided by marginal product of labor. Therefore, at profit maximization, following equation must be satisfied. Following equation must be satisfied. इक्वेशन एक साथ वहाँ पे कॉपी कर लेना. MR इक्वल टू MC फर्स्ट, इन प्लेस ऑफ MR एंड प्राइस, MC की जगह वेज अपॉन MPN, एंड देन वेज इक्वल टू दिस और WIP इक्वल टू दिस. Therefore, a competitive firm will always demand that much labor. A competitive firm will always demand that much labor. A competitive firm will always demand that much labor, where real wage becomes equal to marginal product of labor. Where real wage becomes equal to marginal product of labor. Real wage becomes equal to marginal product of labor. That means W by P equal to MPN. W by P equal to MPN. W by P equal to MPN. That is why marginal productivity of labor curve is called demand curve for labor. ठीक है, मतलब ये रिलेशनशिप ही है. आपने लेबर मार्जिन प्रोडक्टिविटी कर्व ड्रॉ कर रखा है MPN प्रोडक्शन फंक्शन से. इसी कर्व को लेबर का डिमांड कर्व कहते हैं. बिकॉज इफ आई से दैट रियल वेज इज W1 by P1, तो जो रियल वेज है वो हर फर्म के लिए सेम रहना है. एट दैट रियल वेज हाउ मच इज लेबर डिमांड? फर्म विल ऑलवेज डिमांड हाउ मच लेबर. यहाँ उनका ओन प्रॉफिट और ओन प्रॉफिट का मैक्सिमाइज होगा. जब WIP किसके बराबर हो जाए तो उनकी इक्वालिटी तो सिर्फ यहीं पे आएगी जहाँ पे इंटरसेक्शन होगा. इक्वालिटी तो यहाँ डिटरमाइन हो जाएगी N1. अगर रियल वेज कम हो जाए तो कम हो गया तो फिर देयर इक्वालिटी विल बी सेटिस्फाइड हियर, N2 पे हो जाएगा. इसलिए जो MPN कर्व इटसेल्फ है इसी को क्या बोलना है? लेबर डिमांड कर्व कहना है. ये आपका लेबर डिमांड कर्व है. Draw this diagram. MPN curve itself is labor demand curve. MPN curve itself is labor demand curve.
This could you repeat that? How
MPN curve itself is called labor demand curve, because what does labor demand curve is supposed to explain? Relationship between how much is demand for labor at different wages. So if wage rate is W1 by P1, then how much is demand for labor? Firm will always demand that much of labor where their own profit get maximized. And for profit maximization, what is required? They must employ that much of labor where MR is equal to MC. In place of MR, what you have written? Price, because market competitive hai. And marginal cost is wage upon MPN. Therefore, W by P equal to MPN. Firm will always demand that much of labor where W by P is equal to MPN. So this is demand curve for labor. This is one side. What is the other side? Supply curve. And who supply labor? Household. How much labor they will supply? They will supply that much of labor where their own utility get maximized. They are interested in maximizing their utility. Firms are interested in maximizing their profit. Next paragraph. So first was labor demand. After labor demand, write the supply of labor. Supply of labor. And labor services are supplied by individual worker. Labor services are supplied by individual worker. Supplied by individual worker. So classicals assume that individuals attempt to maximize utility. Individuals attempt to maximize utility. Individuals attempt to maximize utility. And it depends positively on their real income, and leisure. Their real income and leisure. Leisure means free time, not working. They get utility from not working as well. Real income and leisure. So supply curve is positively sloped. Supply curve is positively sloped, assuming that substitution effect dominate income effect. Substitution effect dominate income effect. Substitution effect dominate income effect. ठीक है, I will explain that part. पहले ये लेबर सप्लाई का देख लेना. You can draw two-part diagram like this. On x-axis here write down leisure, and in the right side write down work. On vertical axis here write down income. And this side write down wage. Wage में W by P ले लेंगे. ठीक है, जस्ट समझ लेना इस पॉइंट को. ये माइक्रो के अंदर भी यूज होगा. Suppose I am giving the example of individuals. Everyone is having endowment of 24 hours. That 24 hours is available for work as well as for leisure. If I mark any number here, suppose I write 8, then you have to read 8 as 8 hours for leisure. So remaining 16 for work. If I mark here 16, then you will need 16 hour for 8 hour for work. If I mark 24, then all 24 for leisure, no work. So without work there will be no income, zero income. If I mark 0, then 0 leisure, full time work. So full time work, that means if by working 24 hour a person can earn 2400. So how much is the wage rate? 100 rupees per hour. So if you connect these 2 points, 2400 and this 24, slope of this line will be 24, perpendicular upon base. So the slope of this line actually indicate the wage rate. Greater will be the wage rate, steeper will be the line. Suppose by working 24 hour a person earn 4800 rupees. तो यहाँ 48 मार्क कर लोगे, 48 और 24 को कनेक्ट करेंगे, स्टीपर लाइन हो जाएगी, वेज रेट हायर हो गया. नाउ गिवन एट दैट गिवन वेज रेट, उस गिवन वेज रेट को हमने यहाँ मार्क कर लिया कहीं पे. पर्सन डिराइव हिज यूटिलिटीज, आई एम ड्रॉइंग द इंडिफरेंस कर्व ऑफ दैट पर्सन. उसकी यूटिलिटी इस पॉइंट पे मैक्सिमाइज होगी. सो दैट पॉइंट इंडिकेट 8 hour use for leisure and 16 use for work. So at this wage rate a person is working for let us say 16 hour. ये वर्किंग आवर है, यहाँ लिखा है, मतलब ये जो गैप आ रहा है ना, इस गैप को आप वहाँ प्लॉट कर रहे हो. नाउ if wage rate increases from 100 to 200, then what will be the outcome? If wage rate increases, then this point you will have to mark as 4800. 4800 और 24 को कनेक्ट करोगे, when wage rate increases, in fact there will be two effect, substitution effect and income effect. At a higher wage leisure becomes expensive. Wage rate leisure का opportunity cost है, price of leisure है. Suppose I say wage rate is 100, so if a person not working for an hour, how much is sacrificing? 100. But if wage rate is 200, then he is sacrificing in fact 200. So at a higher wage rate leisure becomes expensive, so we use less leisure and use more time for work. Due to substitution effect work increases, but due to income effect work decreases, because at higher wage rate when you work more your income also goes up. With increase in income we tend to consume more of the normal good, and leisure is supposed to be a normal product. So at a higher wage rate leisure will increase and work will decrease. तो वो पार्ट आपको एक्सप्लेन नहीं करना कहीं पे. यहाँ पे assuming that substitution effect is more than income effect, आप इसे लेफ्ट की तरफ अगर मैंने आप इसको मान लिया यहाँ पे अगर ड्रॉ किया तो उसका मतलब हो जाएगा लेजर क्या हो गया, कम हो गया, और वर्क इंक्रीज हो गया. तो एट हायर वेज रेट यू आर वर्किंग मोर. बाय कनेक्टिंग दिस टू पॉइंट्स बेसिकली you get the labor supply का which is positively slow. ये हमारे आंसर में कहीं नहीं आएगा वैसे, we have to simply use it, but since you are using it so you must know why labor supply curve is positively slow. ठीक है, तो बस इसे रफ में आप ड्रॉ कर लो. We will be basically using only this right side diagram. पर यहाँ तक का जो डिस्क्रिप्शन है वो इनफैक्ट ओनली टूल के लिए हो गया. हेयर ऑनवर्ड्स जो भी आप लिखेंगे वो आंसर का पार्ट हो जाएगा. दैट मीन्स वी हैव टू डिटरमाइन एम्प्लॉयमेंट एंड वी हैव टू डिटरमाइन आउटपुट एंड वी हैव टू डिराइव द एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व. ठीक है. बिलो दिस मेक एडिंग equilibrium employment and output. Equilibrium employment and output. देखो जरा ये then the next minute. So far we have written one equation which was production function. So first was y as a function of capital which was constant and employment of labor. ठीक है. So this first equation was basically the production function. तो हमने सबसे पहले production function पर मार्क कर रखा है. When you are drawing the production function you are writing output and employment. Don't copy it. Production function was our first tool. After that, for labor demand, we explained that labor demand is also a function of a real wage. But labor का जो demand curve है, that labor demand curve was basically nothing but marginal productivity of labor. Labor demand curve is nothing but marginal product of labor. तो लेबर का डिमांड इनफैक्ट एमपीएन कर्व है. एमपीएन कर्व को ही क्या बोलेंगे? लेबर डिमांड कर्व कहना है. देन वी डिराइव लेबर सप्लाई. लेबर सप्लाई इज आल्सो अ फंक्शन ऑफ रियल वेज, बट वो पॉजिटिव फंक्शन है और लेबर डिमांड नेगेटिव फंक्शन है. सो पॉजिटिव फंक्शन मीन्स दैट मीन्स यू हैव टू ड्रॉ लेबर सप्लाई कर्व एज पॉजिटिवली स्लोप. देयर इक्वालिटी विल डिटरमाइन the equality will determine the employment. Their equality will determine the real wage. Once you determine the employment, then you determine the output. First of all, which variable will be determined? Employment. Employment will determine output, and then we can derive the aggregate supply curve. So I am just combining all. So when I combining all, now you can draw diagram in this form. Use one diagram for production function, second diagram for labor demand, labor supply, and third one for aggregate supply curve. ठीक है, ऐसे फॉर्मेट डायग्राम बनाएंगे. So in the first part you are writing production function. So write here n and y, and we are drawing the production function first. Lower part you have to draw labor demand. Labor demand, remember, it is nothing but MPN, and labor supply. Their equality will determine real wage, say W1 by P1, और इसे NF लिखिएगा, full employment. Labor demand and labor supply will determine the employment. Since labor demand is equal to labor supply, so that employment is called as full employment of labor. That full employment labor will produce how much output? That will be marked from the production function. So from production function draw the output. So this is YF, full employment output it will be called. Full employment output. Now this right side diagram is for aggregate supply curve. Main diagram आप यहाँ ड्रॉ करें aggregate supply curve. But when you draw the aggregate supply curve, what do you write on the axis? When you are writing the aggregate supply curve, you take price on vertical axis, output on horizontal axis. P और Y लिखना है वहाँ पे, ठीक है. अब जरा ध्यान से देखिएगा. What is price here? तो जो P1 का प्राइस यहाँ पे मार्क कर रखा है उसको आपने यहाँ पे कहीं भी मार्क कर दिया P1. At that price, how much is output? YF. So YF, just mark that YF here, anywhere. If we combine these two, we get 1 point. Just mark that point only. ठीक है. So at price P1, output is YF. Now just see here. If I say that price is P2, then what will be the impact on that output? जैसे यहाँ डायग्राम देखिए अभी. If I say that price is higher, so what will be the impact on output? What will be the impact on employment in the classical model? So at a higher price, ये P की वैल्यू बढ़ा रहा हूँ मैं. अगर आपने P की वैल्यू बढ़ाई है तो रिमेंबर, इफ विद अ कांस्टेंट नॉमिनल वेज, एज यू इंक्रीज P, the real wage will, but as you decrease the real wage, at any real wage lower than this, labor demand and labor supply are not equal. But classical believe that labor demand is always equal to labor, and if they are not equal, then what will change? Wage will adjust, flexible है वो, wage flexible है. So if at any real wage lower than this, labor demand is more and labor supply is this, then wage will increase, and it will continue to increase till it becomes equal. So if wage has increased, if price has increased from P1 to P2, wage must also rise from W1 to in the same proportion, so that the real wage will remain same. Real wage will remain same. But if real wage remains same, then employment will remain, output will remain. So although price is higher, but output remains same. You get second point. You can repeat that process again. Price increases from P2 to P3, again what will happen? Real wage will fall, labor demand will be more. So what is the nature of aggregate supply curve? ये process तो हर बार आप repeat कर सकते हो. So when you connect these dots, first point, second point, by joining these dots, basically you get vertical classical aggregate supply curve. So this is your classical AS. You have to derive the classical AS. क्लियर. सो दिस क्वेश्चन ऑफ करंट ईयर, अभी जो क्वेश्चन है उसका एक पार्ट बेसिकली आप यहाँ पे फोर्थ क्वेश्चन है. व्हाट विल बी द शेप ऑफ एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व इन द क्लासिकल मॉडल? सो व्हाट इज द शेप ऑफ एएस इन द क्लासिकल मॉडल? इट इज वर्टिकल. बट व्हाई वर्टिकल? हाउ टू एक्सप्लेन इट? यू हैव टू बेसिकली यूज दैट. व्हेन वी विल बी स्टडिंग द केनिशियन मॉडल, तो वहाँ केनिशियन मॉडल का डिस्क्रिप्शन भी आएगा. But this is one part. Aggregate supply curve in classical model is vertical, and you have to use only this diagram. आंसर के पार्ट में से भी आना है, इससे पहले जो लिखा है वो just for information था वो. Now how to explain this? Just write it here. Clear है यहाँ तक? Done. In this model, real output. In this model, real output, comma employment, and real wage, real output, employment, and real wage are endogenous variable. Are endogenous variable. which means they are determined within the model, which means they are determined within the model. They are determined within the model. Therefore, production function, comma labor demand, therefore production function, comma labor demand, labor supply, and equilibrium condition of labor market, and equilibrium condition of labor market, equilibrium condition of labor market determine output, comma employment and real wage, output, employment and real wage, output, employment and real wage. Next paragraph. As shown in above diagram, when price level increases from P1 to P2, when price level increases from P1 to P2, then with given money wage, after comma real wage declines, full stop. At that lower real wage, there will be excess demand for labor. And under classical assumption of wage flexibility, after comma nominal wage will increase, so that full employment is maintained, full stop. As a result, employment and output will remain same. Full stop. This explains why classical aggregate supply curve is vertical. This explains why classical aggregate supply curve is vertical. It also explains classical dichotomy. Underline that. Which means change in price, which is a nominal variable, which is a nominal variable, will not affect output, will not affect output, will not affect output, which is a real variable, will not affect output, which is a real variable. तो ये एग्रीगेट सप्लाई का वर्टिकल है, उसका एक्सप्लेनेशन हो गया. नाउ टू थिंग्स अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस वी मस्ट नो. वन, what affect the output, and second, what does not affect the output. What are the factors that can change the output, and what are the factors that will not change the output. So which factor can change the output? When that output can change. Remember, in this entire description, we have used production function. In that production function, we have kept capital constant. We have kept technology constant. So if that capital will change then, or technology will change, then what will happen? If technology will change, then the function will shift up. ये प्रोडक्शन का फंक्शन ऊपर शिफ्ट हो जाएगा, इसको आपको ड्रॉ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. ये प्रोडक्शन का फंक्शन यहाँ शिफ्ट हो जाएगा ऊपर. फ्रॉम दिस फंक्शन वी हैव डिराइव्ड एमपीएन. प्रोडक्शन के फंक्शन से हम मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट निकालते हैं. फंक्शन शिफ्ट हो गया तो कौन सा कर्व शिफ्ट हो गया? मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट की जो लाइन है वो भी क्या होगी? शिफ्ट हो जाएगी. मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट विल शिफ्ट इन द सेंस सेम लेबर कैन प्रोड्यूस more output with better technology, with better capital. So as demand for labor curve shift, their equality is now attained at a higher, their equality will be attained at a higher level of employment. With high level of employment and with better technology, economy can produce more of output. यहाँ से मार्क करोगे आप, ये वैल्यू हो जाएगी YF की. YF हो गया तो ये पूरा एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कब क्या हो जाएगा? शिफ्ट हो जाएगा टू दी राइट. तो एग्रीगेट, दैट मीन्स आउटपुट कैन चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ, इट कैन चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजिकल चेंज, इट कैन चेंज बिकॉज ऑफ कैपिटल चेंज. बट कैपिटल चेंज का मतलब सिंपल टर्म में अगर बोले तो क्या होता है? कैपिटल चेंज हो रहा है इकोनॉमी में, इट मीन्स व्हाट? इन्वेस्टमेंट है वो. Increase in the stock of capital is nothing but investment. So investment can affect the output. Technology can affect the output. Any change in productivity will also affect the output. What is the effect of say Skill India program? With better skill, productivity increases. With productivity increases, marginal product का कब शिफ्ट हो जाएगा और एग्रीगेट सप्लाई की लाइन शिफ्ट हो जाएगी राइट साइड. Any other factor that can affect output? Suppose there is a greater labor, female labor force participation in the economy. How do it affect? There is a greater female labor force participation. With greater female labor force participation, labor supply curve will shift to the right. लेबर का सप्लाई कर्व जो बना रखा वो क्या हो जाएगा? शिफ्ट हो जाएगा राइट साइड. इवन व्हेन लेबर सप्लाई विल शिफ्ट, इवन देन एम्प्लॉयमेंट विल चेंज, आउटपुट विल चेंज. सो देयर आर सम फैक्टर्स दैट विल अफेक्ट आउटपुट. सो वी मस्ट बी फेमिलियर विथ what are the factors that affect the output, and we must also know what are the factors that will not affect the output. So factors not affecting output will be, remember output is a real variable, and in the classical model real will be affected only by real, it will not be affected by nominal. So any change in nominal, like nominal money, quantity of money, they will not affect output in the economy. तो आप यहाँ पे बेसिकली दो पॉइंट इनफैक्ट है, उसमें एक पॉइंट का डिस्क्रिप्शन कर लीजिए अभी. मेक वन हेडिंग, फैक्टर्स दैट अफेक्ट आउटपुट, फैक्टर दैट अफेक्ट आउटपुट. Right, on the production function can shift. The production function can shift due to change in the production function can shift due to change in A, level of technology, B, capital stock, C, efficiency of labor, below that, shift of production function will also shift labor demand curve, because productivity of labor changes. Due to this, full employment of labor will increase, and aggregate supply curve will shift rightward. Next paragraph. On the other hand, labor supply curve can change. Labor supply curve can change due to population growth or due to increase in labor force participation rate, It can also shift due to change in individual preference regarding leisure and income trade-off. OFF. मतलब जब आप ये आर्गुमेंट एक्सप्लेन करते हो तो उसमें फैक्टर जो अफेक्ट कर सकते हैं, लेटर से हमने अगर कोई डिस्क्रिप्शन अगर इस फॉर्म का अगर यूज़ कर रखा है, प्रोडक्शन का फंक्शन फर्स्ट पार्ट में ड्रॉ किया, यहाँ लेबर डिमांड और लेबर सप्लाई की लाइन है, देयर इक्वालिटी डिटरमाइन द फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट, और फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट से इनफैक्ट आपने आउटपुट मार्क कर रखा है, फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट आउटपुट। इस फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट आउटपुट पे एग्रीगेट सप्लाई की लाइन हमेशा क्या कर देते हैं आप, वर्टिकल बना देते हो। सपोज इफ आई से दैट वर्कर्स नाउ प्रेफर टू हैव मोर लेजर, देयर प्रेफरेंस हैज चेंज, they prefer to have more leisure. That means what will be the impact? Weekend Friday से start हो जाना चाहिए. We prefer that, not only Saturday Sunday. Friday should also be included in weekend. How it will affect? If you prefer more leisure, that means this labor supply curve will shift to the left. This labor supply will shift to the left. You are working less and preferring more leisure. So if you are working less and preferring more leisure, then labor supply curve will shift to the, ये left side shift हो जाएगा. If preference is towards more work, then it will shift to the right. With preference towards more leisure, it will shift to the left. Full employment कम हो जाएगा. With less employment, economy will produce less output. With less output, output इधर decrease हो गया और ये line left की तरफ shift हो गई. In case अगर कभी किसी क्वेश्चन में यूज हो रहा हो, then you have to apply that part. ठीक है, उस पॉइंट को याद रखना. तो preference towards leisure can change, preference towards work can change, labor force participation can change, labor force itself can change, population growth can take place. Those factors can affect the output. Technology can affect the output. Productivity can affect the output. Stock of capital can affect the output. So these are the factors that affect the output of economy. ये output को affect करने वाले factors हैं. वैसे there will be many factors that will not affect the output. तो कोई भी example, since I am using this from Freund के chapter के end में कुछ question ऐसे given है, थोड़े applied form के, वो point मैंने basically आपको explain कर दिया. In case अगर कभी किसी question में requirement होता है, in that case you can handle that. ठीक है. But usually the question is basically the state one, derive the aggregate supply curve in the classical approach. ये question कई बार आया हुआ है. या क्लासिकल डायकोटमी का जो पॉइंट है वो भी एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए यू कैन आंसर पार्टली दिस क्वेश्चन. डायकोटमी, मॉनेटरी न्यूट्रलिटी, ये क्वेश्चन तो आई थिंक पास पेपर में आपको मिल जाएंगे कई जगह, लाइक 54. डिस्कस द क्लासिकल डायकोटमी दैट मनी इज न्यूट्रल. यू कैन विल बी एबल टू आंसर इट in the next class. Dichotomy, you know that neutrality of money you have to basically learn. What is the meaning of neutrality of money? ठीक है. Any problem up to this? Factors that affect the output. So just to recap this class, we started with the introduction of classical and Keynesian. So classical is, we are studying classical right now. That means basically we are studying a long run view, and economy is characterized by, it is full employment is guaranteed because of flexibility of wage. We are assuming that supply creates its own demand, and money is demanded only for, because money acts as a medium of exchange, and the output in this economy will be determined from supply side. ये supply side से determine होगा. No matter where you draw the demand curve, demand material नहीं करता, because demand will determine only what? Price, not the output. Supply determined nature of output is a feature of classical model. Just add कर लेने class paragraph उसमें. Next paragraph में, a common feature of factors determining output, a common feature of factors determining output, a common feature of factors determining output in classical model is that all are variables affecting the supply side of market. All are variables affecting the supply side of market. Supply side of market. Full stop. The supply determined nature of output. The supply determined nature of output. Supply determined nature of output is an important feature of classical system. Supply determined nature of output is an important feature of classical system. Underline that sentence. supply determine nature of output is an important feature of classical system. Is an important feature of classical system. And the output will be determined only from the supply side. Demand has no role to play in determining the output. That is an important feature of the classical model. So remember, in the classical model there are different parts. We have just explained since you are studying the model, to explain the model we have to derive AS, we have to derive aggregate demand, and then third tool is low-level fund theory. So once you know all three, then you can answer question on the classical model. So in this class we have explained only the first one, the classical AD, which is derived on or depend upon classical quantity theory अपनी. So next class will be basically on, first of all we will explain quantity theory of money, and after that classical AD, and then we will explain the low-level fund theory, and after that in the final class we will be explaining the policy implication. So usually classical model takes 3 lectures, so next 2 will be basically still on the classical model. Classical model के question concept clear हो जाना चाहिए, because once you know, remember whenever you are studying any model, each model has its own principle, each model is based upon its own assumption. Follow the, if you change the assumption, then the outcome will also be different. वो different हो जाएगा. मॉडल तभी तक करेक्ट होता है जब तक हम मॉडल के assumption को क्या करते हैं, फॉलो करते हैं. मतलब ये नहीं कि आप क्लासिकल मॉडल पढ़ोगे और assumption के निशान लगाओगे तो आउटकम भी कंडीशन की तरह हो जाएगा. But when you are dealing with the question, you have to be very careful, because question may be asking just like this question of 2015-37 question. This question of 2017 was basically combining both. The question was using the classical model, but in that model it kept wage. The question, you have to use the tool of classical, but in that classical tool the money wage was a rate. So once you know the model completely, then you can answer this question. Model completely means you must know AD, you must know AS, you must know classical low-level fund theory of interest, then you can answer this question. ठीक है, तो यहाँ से अभी कंटिन्यू रहेगा नेक्स्ट क्लास में क्वांटिटी थ्योरी ऑफ मनी. बट बिफोर दैट एक पॉइंट और इसमें ऐड करना, सो याद रखिएगा, उस पॉइंट को आप लिख सकते हो सिर्फ. यू विल बी स्टार्टिंग विथ फैक्टर्स दैट डू नॉट अफेक्ट आउटपुट. Okay, we will start with this and then we will explain the quantity theory of money and then we explain the classical aggregate demand and then so on. Clear? तो यहाँ से कंटिन्यू रहेगा नेक्स्ट में. कल की क्लास यहाँ से रहेगी. And one more thing, apart from this lecture, from tomorrow you will be also having your Indian economy class as well. ठीक है, तो इंडियन इकोनॉमिक्स क्लास टाइमिंग विल बी आफ्टर दिस लेक्चर, सो इट विल बी अराउंड 2:45 PM to 5 or 5:15. ठीक है, तो फ्रॉम टुमारो योर पेपर 1 इन द मॉर्निंग सेशन एंड पेपर 2 इन द आफ्टरनून सेशन. ठीक है, ये क्लास इनफैक्ट कॉमन है फॉर बोथ, जो आफ्टरनून बैच है और जो मॉर्निंग बैच है उनके लिए. And obviously that means in the month of November and December only you have to continue with this. After that your paper 1 will continue. ठीक है, number of lecture in paper 1 is more. In paper 2 it is, you can say just half of that roughly. So in November, December you have to basically continue with this so that you will be able to complete your entire content by January end. Otherwise if you go the sequential wise, paper 1 complete होगा, then paper 2, then paper 1 itself will be taking till January. ठीक है, आफ्टर दैट फिर पेपर 2 स्टार्ट करेंगे. दैट विल बी वेरी क्लोज टू योर प्रीलिम्स एग्जाम. ठीक है, जिनका एग्जाम, इट विल बी बेटर टू गो साइमल्टेनियसली. सो फर्स्ट हाफ में आपका वो जो टाइम अभी है ये कंटिन्यू रहेगा इसी ऑर्डर में, मंडे टू फ्राइडे. और कल से आपका पेपर 2 वाली क्लास भी है, इंडियन इकोनॉमिक क्लास, या जिनका इकोनॉमिक सर्विस है उनके लिए आ रखी इंडियन इकोनॉमिक 4th. ठीक है.